It was a dark and stormy evening, the kind that seemed to hold secrets in its very air. The wind howled outside, lashing against the windows of Agatha Christie's study, rattling the shutters as if it wanted to tear open the world outside. Inside, the fire crackled faintly, casting flickering shadows across the room. Piles of unfinished manuscripts lay scattered across the old oak desk, each page a world of words that had never quite found their place. Her notebooks, filled with half-baked ideas, lay scattered around her, waiting for inspiration to strike. Agatha sat in the armchair by the window, staring out into the storm, her brow furrowed in quiet contemplation. The weight of her success seemed to press against her, yet it didn't bring her peace. She had created worlds, birthed characters who had become beloved icons, yet deep down, there was a nagging question: where did the stories come from? What inspired the twists, the secrets, the mysteries she wove into her books? It was as though the characters had been waiting for her to discover them, waiting for the perfect words to set them free. But tonight, as she gazed into the storm's chaotic dance, the question gnawed at her even more. Her mind, usually so sharp, felt clouded, as if something from her past was calling to her, something she had buried deep. Her reflection in the window seemed distant, almost foreign to her. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. She had written so many mysteries, solved so many imaginary crimes, but this was a puzzle that even she couldn't crack. Was there a part of her own life that had never been solved? Had she somehow written herself into the mystery of her own existence? Just as the thought began to take root, there came a knock at the door. Agatha's heart skipped. No one had come to visit her this late, not on a night like this. Hesitant but curious, she rose from her chair and walked toward the door, only to find an envelope lying on the doorstep, its edges slightly curled from the rain. She bent down to pick it up, feeling the weight of it in her hands. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting so familiar, yet strange sent a shiver down her spine. She could almost hear a voice whispering her name as she tore it open, her fingers trembling with anticipation. Inside, there was no letter, only a single folded sheet of paper, yellowed and fragile from age. She opened it carefully, unfolding the delicate paper, and her eyes widened as a cryptic message greeted her. "Your greatest mystery is still unsolved. It's waiting for you." The words seemed to hang in the air, pulsing with a dark energy. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. The storm outside seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself held its breath in anticipation. What did it mean? What was this mystery that had been waiting for her? Was it connected to her past, to the unsolved pieces of her own life she had long since buried? As she stared at the words, something fell from the envelope, a small piece of paper, a torn scrap, as if it had been hastily tucked away. Agatha's hand shook as she picked it up, her eyes scanning the words scrawled on it in a frantic, almost desperate hand. "You've been watched. You can't escape the truth now." The weight of the words pressed against her chest, as if the air itself had turned heavy, suffocating. Someone was out there. Someone who knew more than they should. Someone who knew her too well. Her pulse quickened, her mind racing with questions. Who was behind this? How did they know? Was her past truly hidden, or had someone been waiting for the right moment to reveal it all? The familiar comfort of her study now seemed cold and ominous, the walls closing in on her. She had unraveled countless mysteries, yet this one felt different. This one was personal. Suddenly she heard a creak from behind her, faint, but unmistakable. Agatha spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. The study door was still locked. No one could be in the room with her, could they? The storm raged louder outside, but in that moment, she was completely still, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, ready to explode into the present. What did it all mean? Was this the beginning of something terrible, or was it just another story she could solve, another mystery waiting to be unraveled? The letter had promised that the greatest mystery was still waiting for her, but Agatha didn't know if she was ready to face it, if she could even survive it. With a deep breath, she turned back to the window, the rain now battering the glass like 1,000 whispers. The storm had only just begun. Cliffhanger. As she turned back to the study, her eyes fell on the shelf zone of the books was slightly askew, Its spine cracked. It was one of her own novels, but something was wrong. She pulled it from the shelf, her hands trembling as she opened it. There, on the inside cover, was a note scrawled in the same frantic handwriting as the one in the envelope. "You've been marked. The truth is closer than you think." Her breath caught. The mystery was real, and someone was playing a game she had never intended to be part of. The investigation begins. The fire in Agatha Christie's study flickered weakly, its light casting long shadows across the room, but Agatha felt no warmth from it. She was consumed with a restlessness that had settled deep within her, something she couldn't shake. The cryptic letter, the torn scrap of paper, those words kept echoing in her mind like a distant drumbeat, growing louder with each passing moment. She sat at her desk, hands clasped together tightly, as though trying to steady herself. The world outside the window was dark and oppressive, and inside she felt as though she were trapped in her own thoughts. A brilliant woman, celebrated for creating some of the most complex and compelling characters in the world of fiction. Yet here she was staring down the empty page, unable to write a single word. The irony was almost too much to bear. Agatha Christie was known for her sharp mind and calculating plots, but tonight she felt strangely vulnerable. Beneath the success and acclaim, there was a woman trying to make sense of her own life, a life filled with secrets, half-truths, and unspoken fears. Her career had consumed her, but so had the quieter turmoil of her personal world. The delicate balance between being a mother, a wife, and a woman struggling with her own identity. The expectations placed on her, by the world and by herself, had always been overwhelming. And then there was the marriage to Archie, her husband. Was it love, or was it just familiarity? A connection now distant, perhaps even broken, but one she had never dared to confront. As the wind howled outside, she unfolded the letter once more, her fingers trembling slightly. "Your greatest mystery is still unsolved. It's waiting for you." The words seared into her mind. It was clear, no, it wasn't just a message, it was a challenge. But what was it referring to? The past was a place Agatha rarely visited. After all, hadn't she already solved all the mysteries of her life? What more could there be? But the more she pondered, the more she realized that the letter wasn't talking about a mystery in her novels. This was something from her own life, something she had buried deep, something so painful she had refused to acknowledge it, even to herself. Her thoughts raced as she sifted through the pages of her latest manuscript, hoping for distraction, but her mind couldn't stay focused. She stared at the pages, but the words danced before her eyes, swirling into a fog of confusion. She pushed away from the desk, rising to her feet in frustration. Her gaze fell on the bookshelf across the room, lined with her novels, those same novels full of mysteries that had become her life's work. And yet, it was in those very stories that the key to her own life might be hidden. The characters, each one, a product of her mind, had always felt strangely real to her. The villains, the heroes, the hidden motives, and the twists that no one saw coming. What if, just maybe, one of these characters had not been purely fictional? What if, somewhere in her stories, there was an event from her own life that she had woven into her writing without even realizing it? She turned and walked over to the shelf, her fingers running across the spines of her books. It was an irrational thought, a theory that felt like it belonged in one of her own tales. But as she pulled down a copy of The Mysterious Affair at Styles, her first novel, something caught her eye. The title felt different tonight, as if it had taken on a life of its own. With a sense of urgency, she opened the book to the first page. Her eyes skimmed the text, searching for something she couldn't quite put into words. And then, there it was. A name, a description, a situation that seemed oddly familiar. It was just a few lines, tucked away in the middle of a scene she had written years ago. A character, a woman, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. A woman who had once been part of a love triangle that mirrored one from Agatha's own life. Her heart skipped a beat. The revelation was like a sudden slap in the face. How had she never seen it before? The more she read, the more she realized that her own story had been written into the fabric of her books. She had woven her own trauma, her own buried secrets, into her work without even realizing it. The lines between her life and fiction had blurred, and she hadn't even noticed. But the real shock came when she flipped to the back of the book, where an old, faded letter had been tucked inside the pages. A letter from a time she had tried to forget, a letter from Archie, her husband. He had written it in a moment of despair, confessing a truth she had buried in the deepest corner of her mind. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I fear you'll never understand. There is a side of me that even you can't see." The words on the page seemed to bleed through her thoughts. What was it that she had missed? What had she overlooked? The more she thought about it, the more she realized there was a pattern here. The mystery of her life had already been written, years ago. It was in her books, in the characters, in the situations she had long since forgotten. But just as she was about to delve deeper, a knock on the door shattered the silence. Agatha froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Who could it be? Was it one of her suspects from her past? Was someone watching her again? She stood, slow and deliberate, as the knock echoed again, louder this time, more insistent. Her breath caught in her chest. The investigation had just begun, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was about to come. Cliffhanger ending. Agatha moved toward the door, her hand trembling as it hovered over the doorknob. She could feel the weight of the letter still in her hands, its cryptic message pressing against her skin. Was this the person who had sent it? Or was it someone else, someone with more to hide than even she could imagine? She slowly turned the knob. The door creaked open. And there, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a shadow from her past she never thought she would see again. Her heart pounded, her mind racing with questions. Who was it? The figure took a step forward. The suspects. The days following the arrival of the cryptic letter passed in a blur for Agatha. The storm outside had subsided, but the unease within her mind continued to swirl relentlessly. Every corner of her life felt suddenly under scrutiny, every encounter with the past a potential clue to the mystery unfolding before her. Who had sent the letter, and what was it truly trying to tell her? Her fingers hovered over the old telephone on her desk. She had spent hours debating whom to contact, whom to trust. The people from her past, those who had once meant so much to her, were now strangers in her mind, each one potentially hiding a piece of the puzzle. But could she face them? Could she unravel the layers of secrets they held, all while fearing that one of them might hold the key to the darkness that threatened to engulf her? With a deep breath, Agatha picked up the receiver and dialed the first number. Edgar. Edgar, the mysterious lover. Agatha hadn't spoken to Edgar in years. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always with intensity, with purpose. Their brief affair had been a whirlwind of passion, but it had left scars in both of them. Edgar had always been a man of mystery, a shadow in her life, never quite fitting into the neat boxes of her public persona. He had been part of her early writing days, a fleeting inspiration for one of her most complex characters. The phone rang, and Agatha felt a cold rush of unease flood through her as Edgar's voice came through the receiver, low and guarded. "Agatha," he said, his tone still as smooth as it had been all those years ago, but with an edge to it. "I didn't expect to hear from you again." "I need your help, Edgar," she said, her voice trembling, betraying her composure. "I hear is something I've uncovered, something that ties back to our past. To our past." There was a silence on the other end, a thick, pregnant pause that stretched long enough for Agatha to feel the weight of every unspoken word. "You've dug too deep, Agatha," Edgar finally replied, his voice suddenly sharp. "Some things are better left buried." The line went dead. Lillian, the too eager confidant. Agatha's next call was to Lillian, a woman she had once called her closest friend. Lillian had always been a confidant, someone Agatha could trust until a betrayal had torn them apart years ago. It was a betrayal that Agatha had never fully understood. Lillian's motives had always been elusive, wrapped in a facade of friendship and concern. But Agatha could never shake the feeling that there was something more beneath the surface. Lillian's voice was warm, but strained, when she answered. "Agatha, how wonderful to hear from you after so long. What can I do for you?" "I am investigating something," Agatha began, trying to sound calm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I need to know about something that happened years ago. Something to do with—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Something to do with Archie." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Agatha could practically hear Lillian's thoughts racing. "I don't think that's something we should discuss, Agatha," she said, her voice suddenly colder, more distant. "Some things should remain in the past, don't you think? For your own peace of mind." The finality in Lillian's voice sent a chill down Agatha's spine. There was something off about her response, something that didn't sit right. She couldn't ignore the feeling that Lillian knew more than she was letting on. James, the colleague, with a hidden agenda. The last number on her list was James, a colleague from her early years. James had been a quiet fixture in Agatha's writing circles. He had always admired her work, but what Agatha hadn't realized at the time was how deeply entwined James had been in her personal life. He was a man of impeccable manners, always kind, always polite, but Agatha had discovered after the fact that his relationship with Archie had been far more than professional. "Agatha, I am surprised to hear from you." James's voice was warm, but there was a subtle edge to it, as though he were already wary of her inquiry. "I need your help," Agatha said, trying to sound assertive. "I've come across something that connects you to my late husband, something I didn't know." There was a brief laugh from James, but it wasn't a pleasant one. "My dear Agatha," he said, his tone dripping with something Agatha couldn't quite place. "Your husband and I, well, we had our own history." "What do you mean?" Agatha asked, her pulse quickening. "You'll figure it out soon enough," he said cryptically. "But be careful. You are asking the wrong questions, Agatha. Some people are best left untouched." Before Agatha could respond, he hung up. Suspense and uncertainty. As the phone calls ended, a thick fog of suspicion hung heavily in the air. Agatha sat back in her chair, her hands shaking as she reflected on the conversations. Edgar had warned her to stop digging. Lillian had attempted to steer her away from the past, her unease practically palpable. And Jamishia's cryptic words left Agatha with a cold sense of foreboding, as if she had unknowingly wandered into dangerous territory. Each of them had something to hide, but who was trying to protect her, and who was trying to bury the past deeper than it already was? The pieces were scattered, but they didn't fit. Not yet. And there was one thing Agatha was sure of: she was closer to the truth than ever before. But the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The closer she got to the people from her past, the more it felt like they were watching her every move. Suddenly there was a knock on the door again. It was soft at first, but then it came again, louder, more insistent. Agatha froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Could it be one of them? Was it someone else? Someone she hadn't even thought of yet? She stood up, her legs weak as she walked toward the door, feeling as though every step took her closer to a dark and unknown truth. Cliffhanger ending. Agatha slowly turned the doorknob, her breath shallow. The door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a figure, their face hidden in the shadow of the hallway. But what caught Agatha's eye wasn't the figure, it was the envelope they were holding. It was addressed to her. Her heart skipped a beat. Who was this new player in her tangled web of suspects? The Midpoint. The discovery of the mysterious envelope had unsettled Agatha in ways she hadn't anticipated. The figure who had delivered it remained a shadow, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The envelope, now resting heavily in her hands, seemed to pulse with a foreboding energy. She could feel the weight of secrets pressing against her chest. But it wasn't just the unknown sender that intrigued her. It was the feeling that something far darker, far more personal, was at the heart of this mystery. Unable to focus on anything else, Agatha placed the envelope on her desk and turned back to the room she had once thought she knew so well. Her study, which had been her sanctuary for years, felt suddenly stifling, as though it was closing in on her. Books lined the shelves, their titles mocking her sense of control, their pages filled with stories that no longer seemed to offer any answers. She felt lost. Her fingers traced the edges of an old suitcase tucked in the far corner of the room. It was an odd thing for her to keep. It had been packed away and forgotten for so long. It belonged to a time in her life that she had tried to escape from, a period she had long ago chosen to leave behind. But something drew her to it now. Was it fate or desperation that led her to open the suitcase, her hands trembling as the lock clicked open? Inside, wedged between folded letters and old travel documents, was a small, leather-bound diary. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen this in years. It was a journal she had kept during her travels abroad, a time when her life had taken a much different direction, a time when she had been far more vulnerable than she cared to admit. With hesitant hands, Agatha opened the diary, the pages worn and yellowed with age. She had not intended to revisit this part of her past, but as her eyes scanned the faded words, something compelled her to keep reading. Each page felt like a buried memory, unearthed, revealing fragments of a time she had buried deep within herself. The entries were sparse, but as she read, a particular one caught her eye. It described an event she had forgotten, or had perhaps wanted to forget, a night in Paris, years ago, with someone she had met during her travels. A person who had once been a fleeting figure in her life, now lost to time. But this night had been different. The entry read, "I cannot shake the feeling that something happened tonight, something that shouldn't have. I met him at the cafe. He said he knew me, that he had been waiting for me. There was a strange look in his eyes, as if he knew more about me than he should. The conversation turned dark, and I thought I saw something in his gaze, something that pierced through me. But it's the last part of the evening that I can't seem to forget. He handed me a letter just before he left. I didn't open it. I didn't want to, but I had to. What I read inside still haunts me. You cannot escape your past. It will always find you, Agatha, no matter how far you go." The diary entry stopped there, the ink smudged as if the writer had rushed to close the book in a panic. Agatha's pulse quickened as she reread the last lines. Her hand trembled as she clutched the diary to her chest, the weight of its revelations sinking in. The letter had been left for her that night. Was the person who had handed it to her the same one who had sent the anonymous note that had arrived at her door just days ago? And what did he know? How had he known so much about her, about the parts of her life that she had buried so deeply? A sinking feeling settled in her stomach as she realized that the mystery she was facing wasn't just about the past, it was about her past, the parts of herself she had never fully understood or confronted. What had she been running from all these years? Danger, the walls closing in. The days that followed the discovery of the diary were nothing short of harrowing for Agatha. What had begun as a quiet exploration of her past was rapidly becoming a nightmare that seemed to suffocate every corner of her life. The phone calls started on a rainy Tuesday evening, short, almost breathless whispers that chilled her to the bone. The voice on the other end was distorted, as though it were trying to conceal something, but the message was clear. "You are getting too close, Agatha. Stop now, before it's too late." She slammed the receiver down, her breath shallow, heart racing. The call had lasted mere seconds, but it was enough to send a chill that lingered in her bones. She tried to shake it off, blaming the paranoia that had begun to creep in, but as the days wore on, the calls became more frequent, more insistent. Sometimes they came in the middle of the night, interrupting her dreams with eerie silence, followed by a whispered threat. Each time she found herself listening to the quiet hum of the line long after the voice had vanished. Then came the shadows. Agatha first noticed the figure trailing her one late afternoon as she walked home from the local bookshop. At first she thought it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps the twisting alleyways of the streets playing with her mind. But when the same figure appeared again the next day, and then again the following day, her stomach knotted with fear. It wasn't just the persistent presence of the figure that bothered her. It was the way they moved, always staying just out of her line of sight, as though they were carefully observing her without being seen. She tried to convince herself it was all a coincidence, but the creeping sense of being hunted was becoming unbearable. One evening, as she returned from a late dinner with a colleague, Agatha's phone rang again. This time, the voice was more familiar. It was calm, soothing, almost comforting, but there was something off in its cadence, something she couldn't quite place. "Agatha," the voice purred, "you think you are close to the truth, don't you? But some doors are better left unopened. Some mysteries are meant to stay hidden." Agatha's pulse quickened. She recognized that voice. It was too familiar. It belonged to someone who had been a part of her life for years. But how could they possibly know the things she had discovered? Who had been watching her? Who had been behind the cryptic letters, the phone calls, and the shadow that had been following her? She was no closer to the truth than she had been when this nightmare had started. But now, there was an unmistakable sense that someone or something was determined to keep her in the dark. Twist, the web tightens. In a desperate attempt to understand what was happening, Agatha decided to confront the people from her past, those who had inspired her characters, those who had been by her side during her darker moments. But as she pieced together the fragments of her investigation, she was struck with an eerie realization. The lines between her reality and the characters she had written were becoming dangerously blurred. It was one of those long, sleepless nights when Agatha found herself poring through old letters, scraps of paper, and notes she had kept from her time abroad. She was looking for something that would tie together the cryptic clues she had gathered. And then, her fingers brushed against something she hadn't seen before, an envelope sealed with a familiar wax stamp. Her heart skipped a beat. The seal was the same one she had seen years ago, the one belonging to Edgar, her long-forgotten lover, the man whose presence in her life she had tried so desperately to erase. But here it was, the seal, just as she remembered it. She tore it open with trembling hands and unfolded the letter inside. "Agatha, my dear, you never could leave the past behind, could you? You think you've been uncovering the truth, but I assure you, you've only been playing a dangerous game. The truth is something you are not meant to know, and as much as you may try to escape, the past will always have its hold on you." The letter was signed simply, E. Her breath caught in her throat. Edgar. But why now? Why had he resurfaced after all these years? And why was he so determined to keep her in the dark? As she sank into the chair, the weight of the realization hit her like a thunderclap. Someone close to her had been manipulating the events all along, ensuring that she would never uncover the truth. But who? Who had been pulling the strings? The more Agatha thought about it, the more she realized that the answers lay not in the past, but in the present. Someone she trusted, someone she had confided in, was orchestrating the mystery from behind the scenes. Her eyes darted to the last piece of the puzzle, the diary. She had believed it was the key to unlocking everything, but now she wondered if it had been part of the trap all along. Could it be that the diary, the letters, and the cryptic phone calls were all designed to lead her down this dangerous path? To what end? With dread creeping up her spine, Agatha knew she had to confront the truth, no matter how much it scared her. But as she prepared to take that step, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a loud knock, more like a hesitant, almost fearful tap. Agatha's heart raced. Could it be someone who had been following her? Someone she knew. Someone who was finally ready to reveal the truth. She approached the door slowly, every instinct screaming at her to stay away. But she couldn't. She had come too far. She reached for the handle, her fingers cold as ice. Cliffhanger ending. The door creaked open. But what Agatha saw on the other side left her paralyzed with shock. The figure standing there was familiar but impossible. Her breath caught in her throat as her worst fear came true. It was someone she had never expected. The truth was finally staring her in the face, but it was more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. Race against time. Agatha confronts the past. Agatha's heart pounded in her chest as she stood at the threshold, the face on the other side of the door still imprinted in her mind. She had faced countless mysteries in her career, but nothing compared to the sense of dread that now gripped her. Whoever this person was, they had been the mastermind behind the chaos of her life, pulling the strings from the shadows. The confrontation she had dreaded for so long was now unavoidable. With no time to waste, Agatha summoned her courage and decided to confront her suspects one by one. Edgar's cryptic letters had made it clear. The truth was within her reach, but it would come at a cost. There was no turning back now. Her first stop was Lillian, the friend who had always seemed just a little too eager to keep Agatha's past buried. When Agatha entered Lillian's study, the air felt heavy, as though the room itself held its breath. Lillian sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she turned to face Agatha. "Agatha, you don't understand. You need to stop this," Lillian implored, her voice breaking. "Some things are better left untouched. You are putting yourself in danger." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "I am not asking for your permission, Lillian. I need answers, and I think you know more than you've been letting on." Lillian's eyes darted to the corner of the room, as if seeking an escape. Agatha followed her gaze and saw a photo of her and Agatha's late husband, hands clasped tightly together. The photograph seemed out of place, as though it belonged to a different time when the past had been less complicated. "Why are you lying to me, Lillian?" Agatha pressed, stepping closer. "What are you hiding?" Lillian's lip quivered, but before she could respond, the tension in the room was shattered by a sharp knock on the door. A new lead. The mystery in her own writing. Despite the unease swirling around her, Agatha pressed on. After leaving Lillian's study, she met with James, her old colleague who had often spoken in vague, cryptic terms about her late husband. His expression was unreadable as Agatha laid out her questions, determined to dig deeper. But it was the moment she was alone again, sitting in her study, that the breakthrough came unexpectedly, almost too coincidentally. A single page, tucked deep within the pages of her most recent manuscript, caught her eye. The words were startlingly familiar, yet she couldn't remember writing them. It was a scene of a woman trapped by her own past, the walls closing in, unable to trust anyone around her. The details were chillingly close to what was happening to Agatha now. But the most disturbing part was that the plot of the unpublished story mirrored her real-life experiences in ways that she couldn't have consciously known. The protagonist was a woman unraveling the secrets of a forgotten chapter in her life secrets, tied to a powerful figure who had manipulated her life for years. The connection was undeniable. The events she had been living out were inspired by her own unpublished work. Someone had taken the fiction she had created and turned it into a horrifying reality. Agatha's hands trembled as she looked at the final lines of the manuscript, which were eerily prophetic. When the walls close in and trust becomes a weapon, the only way out is to face the truth no matter how painful it may be. This was more than a clue. This was a roadmap that had been planted in her mind, perhaps years ago, and it was leading her to the truth she had feared. Suspense. A deadly choice. As Agatha pieced the fragments of the puzzle together, she began to feel the weight of the danger she was in. The cryptic letters, the strange phone calls, the shadowy figure following Harriet was all falling into place. But every step closer to the truth seemed to raise the stakes, putting her life in increasing jeopardy. In the darkness of her study, Agatha made a chilling realization. Someone close to her, someone she had trusted, was pulling the strings, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. The danger was real, and it was only a matter of time before she was forced to make an impossible choice. The pressure mounted as she stood before her final suspects, her mind racing with the horrifying possibility that the person behind this was someone she could never have suspected. The trail was getting hotter, but at what cost? The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the truth might not set her free. Instead, it might destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. In a final desperate moment, Agatha faced a choice she never imagined having to make. Would she risk everything, her career, her family, her very life to uncover the final truth? Or would she walk away, leaving the mystery unsolved, choosing safety over the destruction the truth might bring? The clock was ticking. As she prepared to confront the final person in her investigation, Agatha heard a knock at the door. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the knock of someone who had already made a decision for her. Cliffhanger ending. The truth shatters. Agatha opened the door. Standing there in the dim light of the hallway was a figure she had never expected to see. Her heart skipped a beat, her mind scrambling to comprehend the impossible sight before her. The figure was smiling, but it was a smile that held too many secrets, too much history. The last words she had heard echoed in her mind as the figure spoke. "Agatha, you've finally figured it out, but I am afraid it's too late now." The door clicked shut behind her. And with that, the world as Agatha knew it fell apart. The final confrontation, the shocking truth. The storm outside raged in full force, mirroring the turmoil in Agatha's heart. She stood alone in her dimly lit study, her breath shallow, the room filled with the weight of unspoken truths. The figure she had feared, the figure she had never suspected, was now standing before her, revealing the final piece of the puzzle that had haunted her for so long. Agatha's mind raced as she pieced together the words she had just heard, the revelation crashing into her like a tidal wave. "Agatha, you always were the clever one." The voice was calm, almost too calm, as if savoring the moment. "But I suppose no one ever told you that not all mysteries are meant to be solved." Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the person in front of her, the very person she had trusted implicitly for years. The one who had been a friend, a confidant, and yet, all along, had been the architect of her torment. "Edgar," Agatha whispered, the name barely escaping her lips. His eyes glinted with something she had never seen before, a kind of smug satisfaction, as if he had orchestrated every twist of fate, every moment of her confusion. "I've been waiting for you to figure it out. All these years, I kept my distance, watched you unravel the world you thought you knew. But now it's time to bring the story to its conclusion." Agatha could barely believe it. Edgar, the man she had once loved, the man whose shadow had loomed over her life in ways she could never fully understand, was the one behind it all. The mysterious letters, the phone calls, the surveillance, all of it. He had been playing a game with her, and she had walked right into it. "But why?" Agatha demanded, her voice shaking with the weight of betrayal. "Why would you do this to me, after everything we shared?" A twisted smile played across Edgar's lips. "Because, Agatha, you never saw the bigger picture. You thought you were in control, writing your stories, creating your mysteries. But you were never the one pulling the strings. I was always there, lurking in the background. Your most famous characters, though, you really think they were born from your imagination? They were born from us, from me. I was the one who gave you the ideas, the inspiration, the plots. And when you started digging into your past, you started uncovering things that I didn't want you to find." Agatha took a step back, her world tilting as the pieces clicked into place. The moments she had dismissed as coincidence, the parallels between her life and her stories. The strange synchronicities between her unpublished works and the real events unfolding around her. Edgar had been manipulating her life, twisting her own words into a deadly game. You were the one behind the events in the murder of Roger Ackroyd and in The Secret Adversary. Agatha's voice trailed off, horror dawning on her. You knew about my husband's death before I did. You were the one who shaped all of it, everything. Yes, Edgar interrupted, his voice filled with chilling satisfaction. And now you'll see the final chapter. The death of a key character in your most famous novel. It wasn't just a story, Agatha. It was a prophesion I planted, long before you could see it coming. I knew exactly how it would unfold, and now it's all coming to an end. The twist, the prophecy, and the death. Agatha's mind spun. The events in her life, the tragedy surrounding her late husband, the betrayal she had experienced, it was all connected to her writing in ways she had never imagined. Edgar's sinister confession sent a chill through her veins as the truth began to crystallize. The key character, Edgar continued, you never knew it, but their death was destined long before it was written. I made sure of it. And now, the time has come for you to write the final lines, the ones I've been waiting for. Your fate was sealed the moment you chose to write your story as stories that, in the end, were never really yours. Agatha shook her head, struggling to comprehend the enormity of his words. No, this is impossible. I've written my own destiny. Ha! Edgar's laugh was sharp and cold. No, Agatha, you've been living in a world I created. I've controlled every word, every action, and now, well, now you must finish what we started. The clock ticked. Agatha's thoughts raced faster than her heart could beat. Edgar wasn't just after revenge or control. He had been playing a far deeper game, one that linked her very identity to her novels. But as she took a shaky breath, another realization hit her, the final twist, the one that would change everything. Cliffhanger ending, a new mystery. Just as the tension reached its peak and Agatha was about to confront Edgar with everything she had uncovered, the door to the study suddenly burst open. A figure stepped into the room, silhouetted against the stormy night. The figure's face was hidden, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. Edgar's eyes flickered in alarm, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "You are too late," he said, his voice thick with disdain. "This has all been written." But Agatha knew. She felt it. This new presence, this unexpected arrival, had changed the course of everything. Edgar's smirk faltered as the figure slowly approached, revealing only one chilling detail: the letter Agatha had received, the one that had started this whole nightmare, was in their hand. The figure spoke one sentence, their voice low and menacing. "This was never just about you, Agatha." With that, the storm outside raged louder than ever, drowning out any hope of answers. The figure turned, and before Agatha could speak, they were gone, leaving nothing but uncertainty in their wake. The final door had been opened, and the real mystery was only just beginning. What's Agatha Christie's greatest mystery? Find out in our next video.